All right. Does this work? Can you guys hear me with this all right? It is 7, so we'll get going. Thanks to all of those who were here on time. Good job. So I will introduce things. My name is Austin Hepworth, and I will be leading the discussion or presentation tonight, whatever you want to call it. I'll give you a little bit about me, because I'm an outsider to the area. I'm not from Ogden Valley. And I'll just keep letting people in online. I'm an attorney. I practice in Salt Lake City. I live in Murray, Utah. And I've been an attorney since 2010. I have done constitutional law, real estate law, business law, wills and trusts, tax law. I've done civil litigation quite a bit. And there's a bunch of other things in there along the way I've done as well. But the place I'm at currently is I have an organization called Believe. And so you'll see the Believe logo up there. And the purpose of Believe is to really try and empower people to be able to understand that as individuals we can make a difference, we can make a change. So as part of that process with Believe, I do presentations, I teach people about the law, the Constitution, other things, because I believe that each of us can make a difference for good in our world. And so that, I happened to go to law school with Tye Reeder. He lives here in the Valley, and him and his wife said, hey, why don't you come up and talk to people here about this Incorporation. As an outsider, the hope is that I'm impartial, meaning I don't have a dog in the fight, what happens. I'm not here to say one way or the other what should or shouldn't happen. I just want to talk to you about some of the things, I went through the feasibility study, I went through those things. And so we can talk through these concerns, you can ask questions, we can have just a lively discussion if you want. And I do have slides and things prepared to help take us through things. But the goal is to help you have good information so that you can make good decisions. Whatever's best for you guys is the goal. And to give a little bit more background, I'm not here for this reason, but I am running for Attorney General as an independent. I'm unaffiliated with the parties. I say that just so that you can add that into your metrics of whether there's bias or not, or whatever else you want to look at with it. But we won't go into that tonight, because it's not the purpose of the discussion tonight. I do tend to, again from a biased perspective, disclosing who I am, my views, I tend to favor less government. Just from that perspective, I believe people are capable of governing themselves quite often. And I believe that the proper solution to many problems is found in people, not in government. I don't believe the law can solve all problems. I believe it can solve some problems, and that it's necessary to help pull us out of a state of anarchy, but to preserve liberty, we have to have private solutions in places where the law doesn't go. So that's, again, just kind of my perspective and how I approach life. And so you can filter everything through that lens that I talk about. And at any time, if you can't hear me, my voice is a quieter voice, so feel free to raise your hand or something. I don't get offended by that at all. But do any of you have any questions for me? If you want to know anything about who I am. I guess also I have 8 children, ages 17 to 1. And so there's a few of us around. My wife's here. We were able to escape without the kids, so you don't have to listen to them. And so it's nice to have a drive up. It's like a date with my wife. It's amazing to have a conversation without interruption. It doesn't happen often. I love rollerblading. I love playing street hockey. Just random thing about me. But any other questions? Does anyone have any questions for me?
Where are you from?
So I grew up in Magna, Utah. Went to Cypress High School, and I wrestled when I was there. Any other things you guys want to know? I'm a pretty open book, so ask away. But yeah, so we will go into, just dive right into what we're here to talk about. And I guess also one thing to talk about, I put this up with, so the believe says, I believe, with a different color I, and this nation shall endure. I put that there because I'm actually very optimistic about the future of our country. There's a lot of problems, but I feel very strongly that as we learn and gain education, we make better decisions, and a lot of things clear up. And so I always approach things from the perspective of there's a solution. There's a way to get something good in place. And so the culture of the discussion is that it's from a spirit of optimism, kind of faith or hope that there's something good, we just need to find it. I love to hear opposing viewpoints. I will be the first to admit I don't know everything. And so challenge points, raise points, put them out there. We just ask that there's no name calling or putting others down. We want it to be something to realize that people can feel very strongly about either side of this issue and have very rational reasons for doing so. And we don't need any names, we don't need to go into that kind of stuff. We don't need to interrupt or talk over others. But also just be serious about learning, and then also intent on learning from others. And I found that when we do that, discussions tend to go really well. And if you're online listening, you can feel free to jump in. I can't see you online with the way the computers work, so just unmute yourself and just yell at us if you want to say something. James Madison talked about that knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and that we need to arm ourselves with the power that knowledge gives. Let's see, sorry, I met some more people. Want to hear that? And so that is, again, the way I approach life. Knowledge gives us the foundation to move forward, and then we make good decisions based on that knowledge. So starting out, from what I understand, there is proposed incorporation where you could have a new city suddenly, and it could be something that you didn't want. There could be some people that don't want a city and are suddenly part of a new city. From what I know, which again could be wrong, you can fill me in on it, there's concern over some bigger developments, some things that are taking place, and whether Weaver County Commissioners properly represent you or not. And so some people's proposed solution was, well, if we incorporate as a city, we have more local control. Are there things I'm missing in that introduction to the issues? Is that a good kind of summary of it, where we're at? And so now the question then comes, well, what happens next? If we incorporate, what happens? If we don't incorporate, what happens? Because now, again, whether we like it or not, we're in this spot where there's a feasibility study being amended. It's being issued again here soon. I think most people are expecting that it will be determined to be feasible still. And so most likely it will be on the ballot in November for you guys to decide on. And so when I look at this, I saw three main areas, and you can tell me if you see more. Cost, taxes type situation, legal, political, is it better for us? Politically, is it not? Because sometimes you may feel that something's better for you politically, and you may say, well, because it's better, I might stomach some increased taxes, if the two don't shake out. So these are areas you have to decide on. And the third is, I think that's a big one, is your culture and way of life. You have a really neat valley up here. And I know from being a city boy growing up in Salt Lake, I had, as a kid, I never knew this place existed. I never came up here, never even heard of Pine View. And when I discovered it, I went, how did this hide all this time? This is amazing. And from what I can tell, more and more people are discovering your valley. Your secret's getting out, basically. so it seems that something's changing, and there's probably a sense of loss with that, would be my bet, is that you can tell things are changing. Are there other areas you guys would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering how you chose to number those. I would have chosen cultural, so the impetus to go through that starts at the very bottom. Cultural changes, way of life. Do we want to preserve something? And then to get that, you go through the legal and political step. And then if you think you can accomplish what you set forth in the preserving the way of life, you then have to consider the economics of it. So it's almost like just turned on its head from the way you presented it there. So I think we're at the point of the economics, determining, does that work? If you had a goal, can you achieve that goal? And then what is the cost of that goal, and is it worth it? So I would just turn that around in my mind.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I will be honest, this is not an order of importance. This was based on the way that I drafted this was I went through the websites on both sides and looked at the main concerns that came up, and the concerns that I saw anyways from online stuff were mostly economic, followed by second legal political, followed by third culture. So I was trying to just respond to what I saw as the main concerns, but I agree with you that in deciding it for you guys, it would be the opposite way to look at it. And I'm happy to start at culture. If you guys want to start at culture, I have no problem with that, and go backwards through this list right here, because it is very true. I think that's a very good way to approach it.
Just a small point. This thing is a long way from the ballot in November. First off, as you said, there has to be another revision of the study, and then there has to be a certain number of people sign a petition to be presented to the state and verified before it gets on the ballot. So it's not a done deal at all.
Correct.
Okay.
And I agree. It's not done. Again, this is just me filling in the sense of what I've perceived from the outside. What I can tell is people feel it's going to happen. So that's all. That's the only perspective I come from, is that we have that feeling that it will probably happen. But I agree.
I have a question.
Yep.
Even before we begin, I'm thinking, what motivated us to even go this direction? We're here because we think we're getting our valley destroyed.
Yep.
And my question is, can we unwind it if we incorporate? I know that's very complicated, and it involves a lot of things that we think are suable that made it get this far. If we incorporate, can we unwind those things? That's I think, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about this other stuff. I care about that.
Okay. And so for you, I know you're talking about the two large developments specifically.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
And so do you feel there's more than the two large developments? So I at least could see there's the two, but you're seeing lots of things going on.
There's seven developments in the valley.
Okay. Yeah, so that was more than I picked up on.
There's two that, wear the bad guy hat and that everybody focuses on, but the development is widespread throughout the valley.
Gotcha. And I'm assuming the two were maybe the bigger ones, or are they all just as big?
Some of the proposed ones are just as big.
Are they?
Yeah.
But they haven't gone to that extent yet to be undone or approved yet.
Yeah, and the answer about the specific legal question of can you undo it or not, that's one that would be real interesting to look at further. I would need to be able to see how far they've gotten in the approval process with Weber County, because once a government entity approves a certain amount, it is kind of a done deal. You can't really unwind it. There are some things you can do along the way that might make it more difficult or might make it so they can't finish certain pieces of it. But the Utah legislature, I think it was, I get my sessions mixed up. They all kind of run together. It was either this last session or the session before. They passed a new law that made it even harder for cities and counties to stop developments. They kind of fast-tracked developments. It used to be that developers had to kind of get some approval, and then they'd have to come back and get reapproved, and then get reapproved. And the legislature said, once you have one approval, it's done. You can't keep bringing it back in. And so to your point, some of these things, my bet is some of the older ones may be set at the moment. And they probably won't be undone is my guess. But I don't know how far they got in the approval process, accompanied with that law and when it takes effect, to say, are they grandfathered in? Do they get the benefit of the new law? You know, what happens there? Those would have to be some dates that we could look at. I'd be happy to do some looking at that if we want to follow up on it. But that is a real question to look at. Some of the newer ones proposed, if they don't have approvals yet, you would be able to potentially stop some.
Yeah, and I haven't heard the proponents of incorporation say that there won't be growth afterwards. That, I think, is a given fact. There will be growth. Growth will not just stop and end, but it will be regulated, hopefully more locally, is what they're intended.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the feasibility study, it's very express that they're projecting growth. The revenue numbers rely on growth. And so this is only feasible if growth occurs. And the feasibility study very much relies on that. And so yes, I don't think that anyone's saying there will be no growth on either side of this equation. And so then again, it becomes that culture question that's just super important of, well, if we have a way of life, we have something, what's the best way to protect that? You know, how are we going to do this?
See, we feel that in 2016, the general plan was proposed, and then there was a dead space. Didn't hear anything about anything. But what was happening during that time, investors, major developers were buying up the property in those 7 places. So now they're saying, we can do whatever we want with our own property. But wait a second. You have 600 condos, apartments, and a hotel of 100 rooms across the street from me? I don't think so.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's like done.
Yeah.
And so we feel like we were totally conned in a maneuver that was so complex and so unbelievably smooth that it's to the point where people just want to throw up their hands and say, I don't care, I'm sick of it.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want, I'll just move it.
Yeah.
But by dang, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, and that is something of true concern to say. You know, one of the questions is, if we go through with this, one of the real questions is, does it make it easier for these big developers to do their thing, or does it make it harder? And is this just a ruse? You know, is there something going on here that really helps or doesn't help? And that is one of the questions that I think probably tugs at a lot of people's mind is, in the end, is this something the developers want? Or is it something they don't want? Right? You're asking yourself that question. Who's really behind it? What's really going on? Where is it more difficult for the developer to get through? Is it the county or the city? Is it the same? Does nothing really change with it all? You know, what's going on?
I never made that assumption. I don't understand the statement that does it help the developers? How could the incorporation actually benefit the developers? I mean, my bigger question is can we regulate through incorporation to decrease the growth, have better local control. But I don't understand. If you can explain to me, how would it possibly help the developers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's just go a little bit more extreme on the scale. If you're someone with money and you want to do something that you need America's approval for, is it easier to get America's approval for it through the federal government, or is it easier to get Utah State's approval for it? Do you have any guesses? It's easier to get the state's approval. And why is that? Because if you can walk up to the state and say, hey, I have $1 billion to put in your state, that's really enticing to the state. Is that enticing to the federal government? Not as much. And so some developers know it's easier to work with small towns because they can say, oh, I've got $2 million to put in your city. And that's a lot of money for a small town. And so if you are on the city council and you're the mayor and everyone's telling you don't raise taxes, we don't want taxes raised, but your bridges are falling apart and your buildings are falling apart and you've got to do something about it, and the developer walks up and says, I have $2 million for you that I'll put into the city, it's a lot less costly for them to interact with smaller localities than bigger localities from a general perspective. And so developers often, again, so on the legal side, I do real estate, I've represented developers, and when you have to deal with, if you have to deal with the state for approval, it's a whole different animal than dealing with the county for approval. And that's a whole different animal than dealing with the city for approval. Because the thing about being local is it cuts both ways. When you're local and close, the developer has better access, citizens have better access too, but both have better access to those people.
There was a large majority of people who wanted to put a pause on some of this development to just take a breath and reassess things. They showed up personally, they have over 3,000 signatures in the same way. Let's take a pause, let's not do this right now and see what can be worked out. And it was obvious the majority of people were against what was happening, and within less than 2 minutes, those county commissioners voted yes. With less than 2 minutes. There were 5 people that spoke against it. All these other people were for it, the pause, and not go forward with this at this very second. And they voted yes anyway.
Yeah, and
That's what people want. They want to have a little bit more control at the city level.
Correct.
Community level to just say, hey, wait a minute, let's look at this for a second.
Correct, but if you go to it and you look at what percent of the vote do you make up of Weaver County, those commissioners don't really care what you think from a vote perspective. If they tick off every single one of you, why do they care? From an elected form of government. So again, going to the local side, it can be very powerful because if it's your neighbor there and you are the person that votes for them and 3,000 of your voters, of 7,500 voters show up and say don't do this, you feel very different about it than you do at the county level. And so there is real potential power where your voice becomes much more persuasive at the city level. That's a true thing that could happen. And I think it's one of the things that's driving this is people saying, I was up there, they didn't listen. They didn't care. Because from a valley perspective, it'd be like us going to the federal government almost and saying, don't do that. And the government goes, why do I care? I'm going to put that right in the middle. The Olympics coming to town. Utah doesn't really care what a lot of people think about the Olympics. It's going to bring a lot of money, a lot of revenue, and it's coming whether most people like it or not, right? Because at least 50% of people, at least they say in polls, want it. And as long as there's over 50% of the total voting population, we can show up all we want and yell at them and they'll still say yes to the Olympics.
Yeah, and that's going to have a pretty resounding effect here in the valley comes July.
Correct.
It's going to be a free-for-all.
And that is something that I've been put in here to say, these are one of the things we need to look forward to say, hey, the Olympics are probably coming, and it's probably going to impact your valley. What are we going to do to plan for that? To say, can we do something to still preserve your way of life, to preserve things? Maybe there's this crazy time where everyone leaves for 2 months while the Olympics are here. I don't know. But there are some, and I'm going to put in here, there's some potential opportunities associated with the Olympics coming. You might be able to have the Olympics fund a lot of your things, honestly, if it's done right. So we'll go here and then here.
Okay, I just want to say, that I've been up here 50 years. My wife was on the planning commission, and a lot of people in this room. And the county has never listened to us.
Okay.
I mean, they just do what they want. I mean, it's been going on for 50 years and probably longer than that.
Yeah, so here's some experience. Again, I don't have the experience, but I would imagine that's the case, because from a vote perspective, they don't care.
We're the playpen of Wasatch Front.
Yep.
And you know, that's how we're treated.
Yep.
They don't take us seriously.
People like what you have, and they'll come and push their way into it, right?
And to validate the two comments that have just been made, we have an interesting situation here because there's 3 commissioners that are doing the whole county. We represent 2% of the people. And there would be up to, say, 6 commissioners if we were incorporated.
Yeah.
It would be a lot easier to work with 3 that act like you're a 4th commissioner if you're a developer than 6 people that don't want to do anything. So it's a real hot item. We're more mad than they ever thought we would ever be.
Yeah, and there's real power in having some feelings for things. And again, this is what I say, well, let's look at it of how can we take this scenario now and turn it into something that produces something good for you guys with where you're at.
Are you familiar with the amount of taxes we pay up here in the valley, and which goes over to the other side?
To the county?
We don't get, so when they say costs will go up, yes, but we'll also have our tax revenue to help pay for that, which we don't have at this time.
So let me throw up this. I did look at that.
Good.
At least property taxes.
Yes.
How does Weber break down your property taxes? Schools in 2023 got 58% of your property taxes. And these are distributed throughout the valley. This is from the Weber County Assessor site. You can pull this up. Each year you go through, I'll show you the different breakdowns. The county took 21.9, so basically 22%. And that is, you're paying for county things. Now, do some of them benefit you? Probably. Do some of them you'll never use? Probably. It's kind of the same for everyone. But if you live in the county center, it tends to be a little bit nicer, right? Than other places. The other special districts, water, different things, 17.8. The amount that came back to you to put into your place was 1.8%. So 1.8% of what you pay in property taxes is put into your valley directly, is what that's showing.
And would that change if we incorporate?
So if you incorporate, that 1.8% goes to your city instead of to the county. But the other taxes stay the same.
So the schools, we could keep money here?
No.
And for these schools here, they spread
It would go
out
to it would go to the school district, and they would choose how they allocate it. So the schools get paid to the school district, they choose how they allocate it. The county money gets paid to the county, they choose how they allocate it. That 1.8% is what you would get control over with your property taxes. So it's not a lot, based on what you're paying.
I think it's important to point out that the feasibility studies that have been authorized by the Lieutenant Governor say that 1.8% we're paying, the county's giving us 90% back of the 100%. So we're giving the county 10% more than we're getting back, just on that little sliver up there.
Yeah, and again, this is, so the law does say, at least, if you incorporate, the county's supposed to give it all back to you. At that
And we
point.
have a budget surplus.
Well, depending on how much you believe the feasibility study. And that's a question, right? Is the feasibility study accurate? Because if you look at it, and so we can just go into some of these things, since we're here. If we, oh, sorry, I skipped a few. Maybe it's after this. Oh, sorry, I didn't show it directly. So they were showing expenses, they were projecting expenses of about 3.7 to 3.9 million after you incorporate to run this place. Property taxes they were saying was about 474%, or 474,000 of that. Most of the tax money to run the city they were putting from sales tax revenue. And so they projected in the first year $1.89 million of sales tax revenue. Now there is a big, and then they put in about a 9% per year increase, assuming that sales tax revenue is going to go up 9% per year.
May I just have one more point? There are several other feasibility studies out there now. Which one are you referencing here?
The one by the Lieutenant Governor's office.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, and from what I've seen of, at least the documents I've seen, I haven't seen an official full feasibility study. I've seen people that went through and commented on the feasibility study, but I haven't seen another full feasibility study to look at myself. So anytime I reference it, it's the Lieutenant Governor's one. That's what we're looking at. So this did include, they said sales tax from the lodge, from Sundown Lodge, but it didn't include the two other resorts that are outside of the city boundaries. Now there's a big caveat with this though. And so this is, we'll skip this one quick. So this is one of the caveats they put in with sales tax. They said the Utah State Tax Commission wouldn't release sales tax data to them, and that Weber County wouldn't release it to anyone outside the county. So they're outside the county. And so they said they were doing it based on kind of the best they could come up with looking at the numbers they had. But it's not actual data. So in that scenario, you have the question of, well, is it really going to pay for half of our budget or not? Is it accurate? So there is one piece with that. They seem to infer in here that it says Weber County was unable to share the tax data to anyone outside the county. So I went, well, if you're in the county, could you get that data? Would Weber County give it to you? I don't know if they will or not. It might be worth asking. To go to Weber County and say, we're filing a request specifically for this location-specific sales tax data. How close are we really? Are these numbers close or are they way off? Is it lower? Is it higher? Where are we at? I would recommend that if you're a resident of the county to at least ask that. Because they specifically disclose we can't get the data.
Would you question the way that the study was done by LRB? I mean, it sort of insinuates that you're questioning the emission. Do you think that they did a good job, or do you think it should be investigated because you don't think that these professionals did a good job?
That's a great question. And I did forget to talk about this at the start. So as an attorney, we have a lawsuit, and we have to hire an expert to come in and testify. What happens in every single lawsuit in court where an expert comes in and testifies? Do you have any idea? There's one on the other side. Both sides have an expert that say the opposite thing. Every case. And so we have this thing in our society where people during COVID would say, trust the health experts, do what they say. And I go, as an attorney, my job's to find an expert that says the other thing and put that expert on trial, and you put two competing experts up every single time in a case in law. as an attorney, do I look at a report and go, oh yeah, I just believe it? Absolutely not. Because, and it's not to say it's wrong, I'm not here saying that. I'm just telling you, I don't believe it immediately because an expert put it out. I've been in enough cases where we just go hire a competing expert, and people will form opinions for money.
But weren't they hired by the lieutenant governor? Don't we have confidence in the lieutenant governor for choosing somebody who could do a good job?
I don't. I'll be honest, I don't. And so I'm actually running for attorney general. But the lieutenant governor right now, she sits on a finance committee. She's over elections in the state. She sits on a finance committee to raise money for Derek Brown, who's running for attorney general.
Yeah, but that's not really related to this.
Kind of.
It's not. It's totally not. This is a study. Did the professionals do the work? Are they professional? Do they make a professional? You go to the dentist, and if he tells you you've got a cavity, it needs to be filled, you don't say, I'm going to go check another dentist, do you? I mean,
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because as a child, I'll actually tell you why. This was an experience I had as a child. I went to the dentist 1 week, and the dentist said, "You're cavity free. Good job." But he couldn't finish a little thing he was doing. He ran out of time. He said, "You need to come back next week." I went back the next week, and the dentist comes in to do the last little thing, and he goes, "Hey, you have a cavity." I was 12 years old. I said, "You told me last week I didn't have a cavity." And he goes, "You weren't in here last week." And I said,
that's a long shot to compare that to the lieutenant governor. That's like,
well, this
I
is
think
just
that's out of
me.
line, actually.
This is just me, well, kind of, because the lieutenant governor is political still. And the point is, if there's politics being played, then you need to question. I'm not saying the study was wrong. I'm not saying it's inaccurate. I'm saying when you ask, do I trust it? No, I'm going to go through and verify. I'm going to go through and look at things on my own. Now again, you can have conflicts of interest all through things, and it still be good data. It could still be accurate information even with conflicts of interest involved. But as a people, you have to determine for yourself whether it's something you can rely on or not. When I looked at the study, I actually didn't come away, I mean, this is me being fully honest, I didn't come away with deep concerns over their projections. I didn't walk away going, oh, this is so patently, out in left field or something. My attorney, spider scales or whatever you call them, spidey scales, they weren't going, bing, 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 this is crazy, this is way off. But just because an expert did it, I don't personally have stock in that, because I've seen so many experts manipulate things so many times. And I've been involved in politics long enough to know there's all kinds of games played. It doesn't mean that, again, something's not accurate or something's not true, but I need to check it out. That's all I'm saying.
Two questions. One, does LRB have a conflict? In their public finance advisors, they raise money from municipalities. And the other question, is there a third-party review that's done?
Yeah, so that point, to my knowledge, there's no third-party review required for these things. And this is a point, I think, where people struggle sometimes. Because if I were in front of a judge trying to convince a judge this is feasible, there would be two dueling experts talking to the judge. One expert would say it's feasible, one expert would say it's not. We don't have that situation here. We have one study, and then it's up to you guys to determine, well, where do we come with it? Now again, in a court of law, a judge can completely dismiss one expert and believe one fully. He can believe halfway between them. There's different things that happen based on which one's more credible, based on what's happening. But talking about LRB having a conflict, the answer is potentially. We don't know enough. Will LRB be hired in the future to do work for your city? Maybe, maybe not, we don't know. That's kind of up to what you guys would decide as a city. But does LRB operate in that realm? Yes, they do. Does that mean they're giving you bad data necessarily? Maybe, maybe not, because if they give you bad data and the city falls apart, they don't get business, right?
Well, I would say they do. They get more business if the city falls apart, because they have to finance.
Oh, to go raise it?
Bond.
Well,
They're
I guess
creating their own client.
potentially. So if the city wants to stay together, I was talking about, the feasibility study talks about one that 2 years after voted to disincorporate. And so that's, when I was saying fall apart, I was talking about, we just revert back and say, get rid of the city. But yes, assuming that the city has to raise a bunch of money, they would very potentially have a client at that point. Now again, does that mean it's bad data? Maybe, maybe not. But it's something to know. It's something to consider.
First of all, I wasn't going to ask, but what is LRB? And the second thing is, why is this not public record? The data that's out there, isn't it a public? I mean, you can find out people's salaries, et cetera, that work for the public. Why does the Utah State Tax Commission prohibit confidential data?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a great
First,
answer.
LRB.
So LRB, they are a private company, and they provide services to cities. So they are kind of experts in providing professional services to financing, bonding, helping cities out. Now, for some, they may say that's a conflict. For others, they say, well, that gives them expertise to understand what a city really costs, because they deal in that financing realm all the time. So they do have expertise to say, this is what it costs. We've seen it, in all these places. And if you're going to pick someone to do your study, you probably want to pick someone that works with cities and knows those things. Again, it'd be better than me. I wouldn't have produced as good a report as them because I don't know all those details. To the second point about all the information being public, I'm trying to think. So the sales tax data, I don't know why Utah made that confidential. I don't have a good answer for that. But a lot of the data is public. And a lot of the data you can go through and verify. The part that becomes difficult is in the projection side. You can look at what's current and know what your costs are currently, but what is it going to be in 5 years? And that's why they say, the law says, Lieutenant Governor, bring in this expert and have the expert tell you whether there's going to be money in 5 years or not. Because you're going to make a projection based on current data. You have to pull in some trends. They're going to project some things. And essentially what we're doing at this point is we're prophesying about what will or won't be. And then the question is, how accurate are those prophecies? That's assuming that you've decided, to the point earlier, that this is something you want, that there's more value in it. The cost equation comes up if this is something that's good for your city. Did you have something?
All the questions are wonderful. I was wondering, though, if you could take 5 minutes and go over some of your slides.
Yeah. You want to go through some of the slides?
Yeah.
Go through those to talk about some of these things. Yeah, so we'll get back to questions here in a second. Let's see. So to show you some of these, this is, so talking again about that ability to prophesy, when we're trying to evaluate something, when someone says 5 years out, looks good, we have to compare it to our own experience. So you've been here 50 years. You have a lot of experience to go off of. Things will resonate with you better, or say, yeah, that seems true, or no, that's not true. But still, we don't know. We lack knowledge on some of these things. There's experts talking. And then the question comes in, money, interest, are there other things going on? We don't necessarily know everything. We don't know everyone behind the scenes, because it sounds like there's a 7-year period and suddenly you feel like people have been doing things behind the scenes that were really smooth, got stuff through. And so we just then go, well, I don't know what else is going on. And then we don't always know who to trust. Can we trust our neighbor? Can we not? Can we trust the expert? Can we not? We go through those questions. And this is where you guys are sitting, is with some of those concerns. And so the way that I approach that, to say, well, what do we do? Do we try and, how do we make a decision when we're being asked to prophesy? And I say, first is to start with what you know. And then the approach I take is look at the worst possible outcome, but also look at the best possible outcome. And in reality, it's going to fall somewhere between that. It's probably not going to be the worst possible outcome. Those rarely happen. It's probably not going to be the best possible outcome. And if somewhere between those two is a comfort zone that you're okay with again, incorporating or not incorporating, and whatever your decision is, then that's probably the good decision if it's within that comfort zone. It obviously gets a little harder if it's, well, I'm halfway okay between the two, but not at this level. That gets a little bit harder to look at. And so, to the point of property taxes and sales tax, if you're looking at this, we went through this a little bit, this 1.8%. I say, well, let's assume for a minute that we just don't collect sales tax, that their data is really wrong and there's very little sales tax collected here. What would that look like for your taxes if we didn't get $1.89 million in sales tax? Do you have any guesses what it would do? This is a number, so I took the number of households and divided it by the sales tax revenue. Your property taxes would have to go up on average for each household, $527 a year, if sales tax came in at zero, to cover for the sales tax portion of the budget. Other portions of the budget, some of those are state funds that come for roads, garbage collection fees. I saw someone had a question about why is there more money coming in garbage collection than we're paying the garbage collectors. I think there's about a $30,000, $40,000 disparity. To my knowledge, one of the reasons is because the city still manages a lot of garbage collection stuff. The cans are owned by the city, not by the garbage collector. So the city has to buy the cans, they have to replace broken cans. And there's a management side where the garbage collector is being paid just to pick it up. And so that fee may not look the exact same all the time. But some of these things, I look at and say, are you not going to get your funds from the city or from the state? Funds from the state are probably pretty secure unless we get to one of the legal things, unless you don't build enough high-density housing. Then the city will take your funds away and you'll be on your own. But the amount from the city, I think, was $627,000, I think, that they were projecting. But this was interesting. So going back to the experts and projections and where we're at, this top one comes from the feasibility study. The bottom one comes from, I guess I call it the development plan there, the general plan that was done. Have you guys seen the general plan that Weber County did for Ogden Valley? They did it in 2016, 2017-ish.
Ogden Valley did that, not Weber County.
Well, the plan says it was Weber County that did it at least.
Sorry, Weber County approved it, 2-1 vote.
Okay. And so at least, in the writing that I'm reading, it says from Weber County. But there's that general plan. And so if we look at some of the projections, this was really interesting to me, the bottom one, table 3, talking about population and households. I was crazy curious how in 2000 we had population numbers, household size numbers, but not number of households. I don't know how you get household size without number of households, but they did somehow. Because I think you just divide 5,877 by 3.18 and it'll give you households. But again, I don't know for sure. But looking at these 2009 through 2017, your population was really bouncing around. And it was interesting to look at. They projected what the 2024 population would be. They were following some trend I didn't understand with your population. and they projected 7,481 people. 2023, you were at 7,387, and they project that by the end of this year you'll be at 7,502, right smack, pretty close to that projection. So the person that did the population projection did a pretty good job, from what I can see. Households, that was another story, though. They projected 2,901 households and a household size of 2.61. They did not anticipate how quickly the household size would change. And that's very different. We're sitting at 2.06 people per household, which it's a small decimal number, but on an average basis, that's actually a pretty big difference, going from 2,900 to 3,500 to 3,624 projected. And so again, this is something you can look at to say, okay, there were some things that were pretty spot on, some things that were off. Does the household number matter? It may for property taxes. And so if we're looking at the ability to project, that number was very different from whatever they used in the general plan then. And so if they're projecting out households and revenue from those households, hopefully they're using a better metric than they used before. Now, I don't know what metric they used exactly, but again, the population metric was good and pretty spot on. So those were, again, this is me trying to point out, trying to be very fair to say, just because...
Can you explain to me, so how does that variation, how could that affect positively or negatively? How does that play into the equation of what we're talking about here?
So usually when we talk about households, we're talking about to some level of property ownership and property taxes. If you have a house, there's more property taxes. And so this one projected a low amount of households, and we have far more. So the counties, you've had more building than was projected in 2024. That variation, though, actually probably brought you more money into the area from property taxes. So this projection, even though it was off, probably means that you've ended up in a better spot economically with property taxes than would have been projected then, because there's more households paying. So it's to say that even though it was off, this was off in a kind of pessimist way, and there's more people paying taxes than they anticipated, is the way I see it. And so that could be a net gain if the county still grows. If your area grows faster than anticipated, there'll actually be more money than is in the study.
Just a second, you mentioned something about high-density housing and a requirement from the state.
Yeah.
Becoming incorporated, will there be state-down pressure on a city for more density than if we were unincorporated?
It's a great question. I'll answer that as an it depends. I have a slide on this. The state absolutely has a requirement that every city carry its proportion of, they call it affordable housing. They don't like to use the term high density. Affordable housing. And so every city in Utah has to have affordable housing, or else the threat is if you don't do it and you won't approve it, we're going to take your funding away. So you lose state dollars coming into your city.
Which dollars? Sales tax, road tax? Where do they take away?
Yeah, so you certainly lose road tax. So the state has state roads and a certain amount of roads, and you get paid a certain amount per mile for maintenance. So they give you funds to maintain the roads. That's gone. And then I don't know the details on every single possible thing that gets pulled, but from what I know, if you continue to defy them on it, you lose virtually all funding, and so you may not get stuff back.
I thought that the state is going to continue to maintain the state roads regardless of, whether we have cheap housing, affordable housing or not. I mean, the state road is the state road. The state's going to maintain it.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the state pays cities for maintenance on roads within their city. They get paid per mile of road that they have.
Other than state roads?
Yes. And so you lose that to help maintain your city roads. Because there's a gas tax, it goes into a general gas tax fund, and then the state redistributes that to all the cities, saying, based on a mile, we charge it per gallon of gas, but we distribute it per mile of road you have. And so you don't get that allocation anymore to help pay for that. Now again, in the feasibility study, I think they projected that revenue at about $674,000 coming from the state. So if you're looking at 3,500 households and you lose that funding, it may not be the worst thing in the world. You may say, we'd rather pay for these roads than have affordable housing. Now the question though becomes, if you stay unincorporated, do you have the pressure? You don't have the direct pressure from the state, but I will show you this. This is from the general plan. If we go into, let's see, actually did I pass it? Here it is. So the general plan says specifically, in other words, in order to keep pace with the moderate income housing growth trends of Weber County, because the county has a requirement to have a certain amount in it, they said 4 out of 10 new housing units should be affordable to moderate income households in Ogden Valley. So the county's saying to Ogden Valley, they actually say they have a specific finding, you're not carrying your fair share of affordable housing. And so we're telling you in this general plan that's currently in effect, 4 out of every 10 homes built has to be affordable housing. So that pressure is not directly from the state, but it's in your general plan currently that Weber County is saying, we're making decisions, this is the fact, you don't have enough, you need to put more in. So that's kind of coming.
Is that regardless of whether whether we incorporate? That's just already in the plan?
That is in the general plan. If you incorporate, your city could do its own general plan that then supersedes that. But if you incorporate, you have the requirement directly from the state to have a certain amount or lose funding.
What is affordable housing? What is the cost of an affordable house?
Yeah, that's a good question. Affordable means less costly than the average. Now, in Utah currently, nothing's affordable, right? We have, I think they actually said, I saw a study that claimed that the average home cost in Utah was $1 million, over $1 million. As the average. So what's affordable? Again, that's all, it's kind of a metric that just tracks what everything's at. It's got to be a certain percent of whatever. I don't have the exact number for you, but generally what it means is you have to build really little condos to meet those metrics.
Right, but are we going to take the valley and all the costs of all the houses here, and then if that comes to another million, affordable is going to be how much less than $1 million?
It's going to be based more on, I think, the state level of what that means. And so again, for most cities,
Oh, for the whole state?
Do you
Yeah.
know what that's based on, or are you guessing what it's based on?
from what I read in the law, so I read through the law yesterday, my impression of it, without specifically asking that question as I read it, was that it was a metric tied more to the state. But it is one that I don't have the exact detail on, and so we could look up their definition of what affordable means if you want. I have the law here, we could pull it up, and we could do that at the end of this if you want to have that specific answer.
I'm not sure I like that.
Can you clarify what you just said, because I was a little, either I didn't catch it. So whether we incorporate or not, we still are accountable for this affordable housing. So incorporation really has nothing to do with that? Is that what I'm understanding, or did I miss that?
I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with it.
Okay.
You could, for example, go to Weber County and try and convince them that you should put the affordable housing somewhere else in the county, because they get to choose where they put it in the county.
Oh, okay.
What Weber said was Ogden Valley is not carrying its fair share for the rest of the valley. And so in this general plan that was passed, we want to have them carry more. And so the general plan says, this is something that we need people to have.
they're not counting what's already built here, right? Because we already have quite a few condominium complexes.
They did count, at least, so at the time, they did count and say there were some. And they did say in the general plan, you have this much, but as a percent basis, you need this much more. And they said that's 4 out of every 10 homes built.
So you're
too.
saying Huntsville has affordable housing?
Ogden Valley.
It's all in Ogden Valley?
Yeah, this was the general plan for Ogden Valley.
Okay, but it's a city. Huntsville's a city.
Yeah, so Huntsville has to have its own stuff or lose its funding.
Yes, so they have affordable housing.
Huntsville is a
I
town.
don't know if they have it or not.
Huntsville is a town, it's not a city.
Okay, so Huntsville's a town.
Okay, so they don't need.
There's a big distinction.
Yeah, and the town is smaller than the city. And so, yes, so Huntsville, I didn't look at Huntsville at all to see what the requirements are, so I don't have a good answer for that. The answer, though, is every city has to have a certain amount. Every county has to have a certain amount. And the county said, you don't have enough here, and we want you to put more here. And that's the general plan that these commissioners are going off of currently.
Just as a small point, you're correct. Weber County is putting a lot of pressure on Ogden Valley, and across from Harley and Bucks, that strip that goes along there in front of the strip mall is designated and will be low-income housing. They've got the stakes in there tonight. So that's coming from the county, not the state.
Yeah, and that's, again, the county's getting pressure from the state.
Right.
So it's indirectly from the state, but the county gets to choose where they put it in the county. And so there is still the potential that if you guys feel you could go convince them that it's better somewhere else in the county, you might be able to keep it out of here as a possibility.
So would it be fair to draw a conclusion that the county gave the approval over the desire of the local residents to satisfy the need for affordable housing?
Yes.
But then are those houses that are being built, are those going to be affordable housing? It didn't sound like it to me.
Well, from what I saw of the, and again, I didn't get to go through every development and things. From what I saw, there was condo style things in some of these developments.
Starting at $1 million, or something like that.
Yeah, and so again, that goes to the question of what's affordable.
That requirement bootstraps. You can never meet that requirement because you're constantly increasing the value and you need to continue to build more and more.
Yeah.
You can never get there.
And if you look at the cities in Salt Lake County, it is unreal how many condominium units they built. You drive out in Harriman, so there's Mountain View corridor that runs out past Harriman. It's a sea of condos. It is unreal how many are out there. That used to be farmland, and now it's just condos everywhere. It's pretty wild.
When you talk about affordable housing, is it ownership or does it also include rental?
It does.
I think it includes rental, looking at the definition.
Yeah, so Kyle has the definition
It says
here.
occupied or reserved for, so.
So occupied or reserved for, which sounds like it could include a rental, is affordable. Does it say specifically how to determine what's affordable there?
It does. It says, with a gross household income equal to or less than 80% of the median gross income of the applicable municipal or county statistical area.
Okay, so I was wrong, and it is based on the city or county area. So if you're a city, it's based on your city. It's gotta be 80%, meet that 80% threshold of what your city is. So if your city costs $1 million, then the house has to be 800,000 or less.
Our biggest problem is having the household occupied. And there's so many who are just completely unoccupied.
Yeah. And one of the things you have with that is, at least one of the things I saw was there's concern over all of the Airbnb rentals and other things that go on, especially up mountainside towards the resorts. Now, that can be a blessing and a curse because you can impose sales tax on those things. You can tax that type of stuff to get more revenue. And so if you do have a ton of people just coming through, outsiders can pay a lot of your taxes. But it changes the culture of your valley.
The real big question in my mind is, with a limited population, who are we actually going to be able to tap with the qualifications to be city commissioners? We
Yeah.
have a very small population, so that doesn't leave an awful lot to draw on. You know, no disrespect to those present, but it's a big job. I know when the county commissioner position opened up, you know, there wasn't a flood of people volunteering for that job.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I have here as well to talk about, is to say, if you do incorporate, what are your options? Do you have neighbors you can trust? Do you have people you can say, hey, Bob, you're the man, or, you know, Jane, you're the woman, we need you. Jen, apparently. Jen, we're talking about. Do you have people you would trust to be in these positions? You're a small town, county, area. You know a lot of people. Who are you going to elect? And again, it goes back to this question of, well, if there's a bunch of developers and they've got some friends and they say, hey, you run for office, and no one else runs, what happens? And so that is one of the things that if you choose to incorporate, you need to be looking at it going, we need to be pretty proactive about selecting a government to really set us on the right foot at the beginning. Because one of the options that exists with this is that, let's see here, I'll skip here to the end a little bit. This doesn't get talked about a lot, but the Utah Constitution lets cities set a charter in their beginning. And charters can kind of be like a constitution. They can set a tone, they can put in certain checks and balances, they can do different things. And you actually the process is you go vote and say, should we appoint a commission of 5 or so people to create a charter for us? They create that charter, it comes back for a vote. But you have the option of being proactive and saying, are we going to look at this and go, you know, if we're going to move forward with this, we really need to have some checks and balances in place. And one of those, you can have different checks and balances. So let's say that you get a government you really like at the start. You go find your 5, 6, 7 people, and you say, we're going to support you, we're going to put you in, and they go create a new general plan. You could potentially put in your charter to say, hey, if you're going to rezone from our general plan, because a big developer came in and wants a rezone, that requires a 60% vote of the people. You can put in checks and balances like that to start to say, if we're going to be a city and we're going to do this, we want to ensure that it just doesn't become a runaway thing, that if we're going to deviate from certain things we put in place, come back to us. Now, again, that could be bad if you are really hurting for money and you really need a development and 60% of people won't approve it. So these are some of the things to really think through. But the way that I like to look at government is government runs well when it has strong checks and balances in place. And currently, you, I think, have felt there's not a lot of great checks and balances you have with Weber County. It's just kind of the thing, you're just subject to whatever they say. It could be that way in a city. The same thing could happen, where you elect people and then they just do their thing. Now, the chance of it is likely lower, but again, as a people, you think, well, what do we really care about? What would be some checks and balances to put in place? And could we do it through a charter type mechanism to say, hey, mayor, you can't just do whatever you want. Hey, city council, you can't just quite do whatever you want. There's things that have to come back to the people. And because I know, even looking at Salt Lake City, there's these proposals. I think South Salt Lake, Mill Creek area has one where a developer wants to build a 30-story skyrise skyscraper. Just there's no building around it that size, and they've applied for a rezone. Not a lot under current zoning, but they have a lot of money to put in the city. And that one's still in the works. What's going to happen? IHC wants to put a brand new hospital in right in the heart of downtown Salt Lake. They want to level a whole city block. They need a rezone for it. Now, hospitals, I think, generally good things, but still, it's the people currently don't have a lot of say in that. You get to come to a hearing and you get to voice your opinion there, but that's about it. And if you want any other check and balance on that, the only other check and balance is to do a referendum. So this happened in Erda. Erda had the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints proposed a temple in Erda, surrounded by a very, very significant real estate development that included a lot of high-density housing. Erda said, "Whoa, this is not who we are." City council said, "Sure," approved it. The residents said, "This would completely destroy our city, our little place out here. We don't want all this high density." They said, "We're fine with the temple, but we don't want the high density housing." And so they did a referendum, they got signatures, it got placed on the ballot, and the church pulled out and said, "Okay, we won't build that here." And they then built the temple a couple miles away in Tooele. And so you do have the check and balance prospect of a referendum. Doing a referendum in the county is very difficult because you have to get signatures across the county. Doing a referendum in your city is much easier if you're going to have a check and balance on something that they do that's just egregious. So that is one check and balance thing that's in place, but still gathering signatures is difficult. It's not easy. People can remove their signature after they sign it for something like 30 days after your deadline. And so a lot of the proponents of, this is happening in Salem, I think. Salem has a big development. And the big development came in and they didn't do a full feasibility study on the impact to the water supply. And so some residents went and got a petition together and said, "Let's sign this." They got enough signatures before the deadline, they submit it. And then the developer went to everyone on it, because you can see that publicly. And they pressured them into pulling their names off until they didn't have enough, because they have 30 days after. So it's this funny process. But again, you can say, well, in our city, this is how we do things. And this is part of the proactive side. So you have, now, maybe this doesn't work, maybe not enough citizens sign. But if it does work and it goes forward, you have time to actually talk through and say, how should this look? What should we do? Are there people that we would trust to be in these positions, or are we going to be in the same spot? At the end of the day, are we going to be in the same spot? And it's a real legitimate question to ask, to say, are we any better off with those that get elected than the county commissioner?
So, you could ask that question, even if it costs more, even if some of these assumptions are incorrect and it costs more, how much more is it going to cost? It's hard to put a number on that, but is it possible that by costing more, we could preserve our way of life?
Yeah. And that's a very real question to ask, to say, because again, you look at it and go, this is something else. Let me go to this slide on this point of cost. This is one of the, this is one of their disclosures in it, in the study, that is something you need to be aware of. So this one actually says, stakeholders pointed out. So someone was talking to LRB during this time, and they were very clear. Stakeholders pointed this out to us. They said, you don't need to include the projected cost of capital improvements to bridges, roads, anything else we have to maintain, because the people are going to have to pay for it anyways when it comes up. So to give you some background on what that means, we talk about the U.S. national debt. It's at 30-something trillion dollars, numbers we can't even fathom. But if you look at America's unfunded liabilities, meaning we haven't set any money aside for these liabilities, and if you just look at the sheer cost of just bridge maintenance, what is going to cost us to fix America's bridges that exist? It's absolutely staggering. The number of unfunded liabilities in America is in the hundreds of trillions of dollars, which means we haven't saved as a country for expenses that are coming. We know they're coming. We haven't put a single dime away for them. And I went through this in West Valley City. I lived in West Valley, and we were in Granite School District, which is a pretty old school district. I went to Cypress High School, which was almost 100 years old at the time. It had been rebuilt in a couple different ways, and it was a funny school. All these different pieces to it that had sunk or been built or whatever. But eventually they said, and we had the little earthquake in Magna right when COVID hit, and it did $1 million of damage to Cypress. And Granite School District goes, oh, guess what, everyone? We have a lot of schools that are 100 years old. We need to replace them. We wouldn't save a dime for it. Our property taxes almost doubled that year. They issued a bond for it, but even start paying the debt on that bond, it almost doubled our property taxes. In my 8 years in West Valley, my property taxes almost tripled. Almost entirely from the unfunded liabilities associated with the schools that need to be replaced.
I was just going to speak to that, because Utah Study just put out, Utah State just put out a study in the last few weeks on all of the asphalt and bridges within Weber County. And they specifically looked at the Ogden Valley and are predicting the immediate capital improvements over the next 0 to 6 years are $10 to $20 million for our roads and bridges. So,
yeah, and so on that, the study says we didn't include that cost in here because it's hitting you guys no matter what.
Right.
You're going to get charged that by the county for those capital improvements.
But isn't it spread out over more people?
Maybe. It depends on how they do it. And that is a good question to look at, to say, does Weber County spread the cost of capital improvements out? Now, again, if that's the case, you're also going to be paying the capital improvements of other people in the county too. There's a lot of money in the capital improvement cost world coming down.
Yeah, so speaking on the
Right.
road, we're looking at over 190 miles of road within the valley. And you talked to Sean Wilkinson at the county, who's the head of roads and all this. And the county will tell you that 90% of the roads are so far, what they call impaired, and will need to be replaced in less than 10 years.
Yeah, and so
Especially
these
if
are.
we're getting the Olympics here.
But this is where your potential comes up. So this is a fascinating thing about government. Government is not required to save for known liabilities coming. Businesses, if you're a business, you don't necessarily have to save for it, but you at least have to put it on your financial statement and disclose it to the general public. If you're a publicly traded business, you have to say, yeah, our assets are depreciating, they're not going to be worth anything, and we're going to have to replace the whole thing, here's the cost of it. They have to put that on the financials because it impacts financial viability if you're going to buy stock or not. The government doesn't have to. And most government units choose not to save any money for capital improvements. They just choose to issue bonds and increase taxes when it hits, because it's a little bit easier to tell someone, oh, your schools are falling apart. You going to be the one that doesn't let your kid go to school? Than it is to say, hey, we should start putting some money away because in 50 years we need to replace this.
So if it's the same, whether we incorporate or not, and we're going to be paying those dollars in the future, if we do incorporate, we will be able to determine which roads get fixed when,
Yep.
rather than somebody who's sitting in Ogden saying that there's a project going on like an inland port and they need to make sure those roads are fixed.
Correct.
Our local municipality will make sure our roads are fixed.
Correct.
Under those circumstances and those assumptions.
Yes, and that is accurate. The other opportunity that comes in is, this is Utah code. So even though a government entity doesn't have to save money, a city is allowed to save money for capital improvements. So if there is a surplus, the city can set up a capital improvement fund and put money into it to cover those costs so your property taxes don't double suddenly in a year. So this is one of the reasons why I say, well, if the Olympics is coming to town, and it's coming to town no matter what, if we can't change that, if you incorporate, you could tell your city, you got to set up this capital improvement fund. And you could say, let's tax every dollar we can out of the Olympics, tax every foreigner that comes in here, and put all that money into a capital improvement fund. You could have the Olympics pay for your capital improvement fund if it's coming anyways. And so I look at that and go, well, again, this depends on who you vote into office, but there's a lot of money that's gonna be eked out of you guys over the coming years. Now, they probably aren't gonna raise your property taxes to get $10 million. They're probably gonna issue a bond and do that. But like you say, if they want the inland port, that might be the priority, not you guys. And your stuff may suffer potentially.
In regards to the capital improvement fund, the county is actually required to treat the unincorporated areas as a city, and they do have a capital improvement fund. They put in about between $1 million and $1.5 million over the last 3 to 4 years per year. If we incorporate, is there access to those? Do we get our share of that, or does the county just hang on to it?
That's a good question. Utah code specifically says which property taxes they share with you if you incorporate. I don't know immediately if that's included in it or not. Now, if the county's doing it, it's because they elected to do that. The government's not required to, but they can elect to. And again, you can elect to do that if you're a city. But this is one where if you look at the future and you go, yeah, our schools, that 58% we're paying to schools isn't going into a fund to account for replacement costs later. It's just paying teacher salaries and maintenance today kind of thing. And so one way to look at it is, yeah, you're going to have tax issues. And then again, well, do we want more local control and perhaps the chance to say where that goes and what happens? Or do we want Weber County to decide that? Those are things you guys would have to decide on.
Since we're talking about economics and these situations, currently here in the valley, there's one CRA, one community redevelopment agency. There's a second one being proposed around Nordic Valley. I'm hearing there's a third one which may come forward. If those get established and set up, then you go and incorporate. Who then governs the CRA? Does it stay with the county, or does it move to the city if it's within the boundaries of the city?
So to my knowledge, and this is one that I could be wrong on, so I'll say that openly. And this comes off of a comment from, this was asked at the initial feasibility study meeting, and the response from LRB was that anything that's within the city boundaries comes under the jurisdiction of the city at that point, is what they said. That was their answer. I haven't specifically looked at exactly everything that transfers over. It's a little bit difficult to follow in the law. I didn't have enough time to fully understand everything, but I looked at their comment, and their comment was anything within the city boundaries transfers over.
CRAs could be important because tax money no longer flows back to the taxing entity and all that. It stays with the developers to help improve things within their boundaries, not within the city as a whole.
Yeah. And again, even when you think about options for things, if a developer comes in and wants to do something, cities often have development exactions, they call them, where they say, if you want to develop, you need to give us a new park, you need to rebuild this road. And so if you're a city, you can make some decent demands on developers to say, yeah, if you want to do this, this is what it takes to get our zoning reapproval. County, again, they will have some exactions probably they want. Will it be the same ones you want? Probably not.
Does a new city have the responsibility to develop a water and sewer plan? I mean, right now, we're pretty fragmented with 87 water companies, septic here, sewer there.
Yeah, cities are allowed to continue using whatever was in place before. They don't have to have a brand new water or whatever. As long as there are services before, they're allowed to continue using whatever was in place for those. And most cities, well, I don't know about most, a number of cities just use, whatever is set up. I know when I lived in West Valley and we were in the Granger Hunter Improvement District, it was a private company that provided water. And so that's just varies. But in Murray provides water where I live now.
Let me take you back to that economic slide where you're talking about sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put that up?
Yeah.
Maybe you can find it. presentation, my opinion, has been pretty well balanced, but I find this particular slide is very one-sided. There are opportunities within the city to raise additional revenue. The easiest one to be would be to make sure that we tax and collect revenue from short-term rentals.
Yep.
That would be an easy pickup, and I think this is one way to look at it, but I think there should be another paragraph in there that says there are other ways to raise money within the city. It's
Yeah.
not being recognized by the county at present.
Correct, and it's a very good statement to make. I will give myself a little bit of grace in that this was originally intended to go through an order, and this followed the one that talked about look at the worst case scenario. So this was just purely an example of a worst case scenario. But the best case scenario is, hey, Olympics come, we fund all our capital improvements, we've got short-term rentals, we can fund all kinds of stuff. And maybe taxes go down.
Yeah, I mean, also, before we talk about, there was some concern with the accuracy of the numbers, and why wouldn't they give it? As I understood it, it was because there were too few people reporting, so there was not the anonymity possible, because one person knowing how much they pay, or one entity knowing how much they pay of that total, they could figure out somebody else's taxes, what they were collecting as sales tax. So it's because there were too few reporting entities. So
you're saying that's why Weber County didn't want to release it?
that's correct.
Okay. And again,
As I understood it.
And that's a helpful point to make, to say Weber County was concerned about people knowing essentially how much you make and spend, because there's too few of you, you could kind of dissect it and figure it out. Now they said in their studies, because we're outside Weber, so I still have the question, well, if you guys asked for it, could you get it? I don't know. But if they are concerned about confidentiality, that question did come up, and that might be why.
Great presentation. I appreciate you coming here. We have to leave.
Is it time to leave? Is the library closing?
No, I have to leave.
Oh, you gotta leave. Okay.
Close in 30 minutes.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And again, if anyone needs to leave, feel free to leave.
Austin, do you also have a place for people to put their emails if they, I thought I saw something, because you're doing future, like, what am I saying? We're inviting Austin to come monthly, sorry about my voice right now, just to talk about any issues that people would like him to help dissect, because I think it could be beneficial.
Yeah, so these are things, again, on the part of my work is just to go teach people about the law, about things so you can make informed decisions or solve problems. So I do talk about constitutional issues, legal issues. If there's something burning you want to talk about, I'll prepare a presentation on it, as long as it's connected to the law somewhere. So yes, there is a little sign-up sheet if you want to put your email on it. If because Tye's trying to schedule things once a month to come up here.
Will your presentation be accessible?
So I have a YouTube place. I could put this up on YouTube. I started recording a little late, so I missed the start of it, but it is being recorded. I don't know how well it's being heard online. Hopefully people are hearing it. People are still on.
Specifically regarding your slides.
The slides,
Lots that we've missed.
I can email these to you. You can look at them. I'm happy to do any of that.
So how do we access, so we need your email to respond to us?
So you can either sign up here and say, send me the presentation if you want, or I have a business card. You can take a business card, just email me directly and say, hey, can you shoot it to me? Any of that. And I'm happy just to take questions offline if you want to call and ask questions. I'll answer questions. Again, I'm not here pushing for either way necessarily. I'll try and disclose. I'll disclose one thing. I did have one bias too I forgot to disclose. I don't love the name.
Amen.
I really don't love the name, so that's a bias I'll throw out there. But they claim you can change that after.
We want damn city.
Maybe you should just, whatever the hockey team ends up being, use the same name, and maybe you get more money that way. Who knows? I don't know. But.
You touched in just the short term, but I know it's going to be a very difficult question. But some people have said it's going to cost $500,000 to do this, get an office building for a year's rent and to staff it. with secretaries and whatnot, someone else said, no, it's gonna be like 2.6 million. Somebody has offered a building in which to have this office building. And so that real estate part of it would be down, although that's a realtor in the local area, so people are afraid that that's gonna put, too many cooks in that pot. To have another realtor having their hands in it by donating their office space for it to use. Do you have any touch on those costs involved in that?
I will say that my perspective is every one of those is possible.
Mark Farron said that Huntsville offered use of their new building going up, and there would be a smaller fee, but I heard that as well.
And so this is something that, when it comes to something like, so Granite School District comes to us and says, hey, we need to build new schools. We say, okay. And then they go bond and they do their thing and they come back and these schools come back and they look like mansions. They are building very gaudy, high and mighty type buildings. They're nice. They have fake turf football fields that cost millions of dollars to put in. And I go, why are we spending so much money to look a certain way? And so Utah right now, one of the weaknesses in Utah culture, I believe, is we're very concerned about our image. I think it's one of the reasons we want the Olympics back. We want to look like this amazing state. We're concerned that people see us a certain way. And if you elect a city council that's concerned about their image, they're going to build a nice building. And it can cost, there's no limit on what that could cost. They could do whatever they want with it. And if they have the power to tax and do things, sometimes people do stuff with that. That's, again, when I go back to checks and balances to say, well, who are your people? If you go in with the budget-conscious people, and they say, yeah, I can work out of my house. You know, you want to talk to me? We got the barn out here. Come on over. That can work for a city council building, if you guys are okay with that and your council's okay with that. And so that discussion is one you're going to get crazy different answers on, because the people talking have very different opinions on what's needed. And the way that I would measure that is to say, okay, do I hear more people talking about, yep, let's go with the free option? Or do I hear more people talking about, no, it's going to be a couple $1 million. If that's what most people are saying, it's going to be a couple $1 million, because that's what people will want. And ultimately, the people elected will go with what most people want. So just ask around. You know, what are you comfortable with? What are you going to tell them no to? You know, because they can say, oh, we can borrow the money. It's all right. It'll only raise your taxes $10 this year because we borrowed the money. That might be true. And is that worth a $2 million city hall? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe when the Olympics come, people are willing to spend more money because your building looks nice. I don't know. But that is very much a feel of the community. That's a culture thing of what is our culture, and do we care this much? You know, what are we going to do with that? Sorry, right here.
Just a general question that keeps coming up is, if you incorporate, are your fire department, police department, snow removal department, all that kind of stuff, are they now handled within the city, or are we still under the county?
It's a good question. And the answer to that is you get a vote and decide. So cities can contract with counties or other cities to provide services if they don't provide them. So there's many small cities that contract for police or fire services, and the police and fire come from other towns. And that's very much based on cost, benefit, expense, all that kind of stuff, of how that shakes out.
Did you jack up the price if you rent, or no?
Well,
You can't really look.
it's a thing too that if you look at the city and they have a surplus, if their firefighters are sitting there most of the time and they're paying them, they're going to welcome anything, because it then helps reduce the taxes. And so I found that typically that cost sharing works pretty well. And to his point, you know, there could be laws and things that protect that. I don't know personally on those laws. But from a city's perspective, if you have excess capacity because you just have to pay the people, you welcome someone helping to now offset that. And so generally we aren't, because if you make it too cost prohibitive, they're just going to form their own.
One thing on that question, you have to be aware of what is the entity that the city would control with the county. The fire department in Weber County is a separate entity, and Huntsville doesn't have one. They're serviced by the county, and this city would be too. So.
Yeah, most likely.
The sheriff.
Yeah.
Unless you decide as a city you want to go independently, but initially it would be a service provided by the county.
And that's
county, I should say, the fire authorities commissioner or something.
Yeah, and that's usually how cities start. It's usually far easier to start just leasing the people to help than it is to form your own thing. And usually it's a few years down the road before you even consider that. Now in Salt Lake County, there was a bunch of cities that got together and did the unified police department. Right. And so there's a lot of cities that paid in. That's kind of breaking apart now because cities are going, we have way fewer police calls than you. We're paying the same. This is a joke. And so some are starting to pull out. It's still kind of there. But yeah, the cities, it's totally up to them with what they do.
Do you have any thoughts on the size of the boundary of the incorporation? I mean,
It's
a
huge.
Really, really big one.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the 4 or 5 biggest cities by area in the state with a pretty small population. I mean, is that reason for concern?
It's a yes and a no, depending on how things go. What it does is it gives you far more control potentially over the whole valley, right? I think the people, again, that are saying, yes, let's incorporate, are saying, well, we want to protect this valley. So they're making it as big as possible. Because then there's as much local control as possible. Now, on a cause of concern basis, it could be that your city then grows huge. And you get a lot of people in it, and suddenly you feel like you don't have any say because it's totally different people that have moved in, everyone from California, whatever. And it can change the dynamics of the government and things quite a bit. And so there's this cost benefit. If you can keep the city in its state as it is currently, you'll be in a pretty good spot with the area. If the development goes wild and you lose that, it will radically change the whole culture because now the city controls everything and it's going wild with everything, kind of thing. So part of that is just in who are you electing, what tone are you setting in the first 5 years. And this is something to throw out. I did see some questions online. People would ask, is there any good examples of cities that have done well? There are. And so I lived in West Valley, and I actually went and compared, just going, how much did West Valley charge me in property taxes compared to how much Murray charges me in property taxes? Night and day difference. West Valley is way more expensive. Murray has its own power plant. It's way cheaper than Rocky Mountain Power. They have their own water. It's cheaper than the water I was buying in West Valley by a lot. I'm paying way less in property taxes to the city and the school district. Murray has its own school district. And Murray chose to be very independent and form all its own stuff. And they manage it incredibly well. And my taxes are far lower. They're the lowest in Salt Lake County as far as I know. And it's this independent thing. Now it has more people than you guys have. You don't have your own power plant and things. But cities can do well if you get them on that trajectory. And once there's a culture and a trajectory behind it, you generally get people doing the same thing in that. And the critical time is this defining period. What are you going to do in the first 5-10 years? What are you going to put in place? Are you going to put a charter in place? Are you going to put checks and balances in place or not? Because some cities do very well, and things do very well, and they maintain things. Other ones, and it's not always to say that people are bad, it's just to say, to the one point, do you have the expertise necessary to manage it? It's a real skill. You can't just have anyone come in and suddenly have a $4 million budget. It takes skill and training to manage that well and to do that well. And so that's part of, I have no idea what kind of people you have, what kind of talents you have here. If you have those people that can do that, and you elect someone that's very wise with money, very judicious, you could do super well. It's kind of like, whether or not you like Mitt Romney as a politician, when he came in with the Olympics was doing horrible. Mitt Romney's an incredible money manager. He came in and it was the first Olympics in a long time to actually make a profit. He did incredible with that. He's an incredible manager of money and could really do a good job there. If you have someone like that, you'll be in a good spot. If you don't, you might be like, let's see, this city, I don't know if you guys saw this in the feasibility study. Cedar Highlands in Iron County incorporated in 2018. Within 2 years, they were bankrupt. So again, this is kind of best and worst case scenario stuff. I'm not saying this will be you guys. They do throw this in. They say, yeah, they're actually kind of similar to you guys. Now, the mayor specifically said, so the St. George News article, the mayor said, it was our lack of commercial revenue, so we didn't have enough businesses in here, and we were heavily reliant on state road income and sales tax. The feasibility study puts you guys as heavily reliant on sales tax and road funds. And so they do make a note here to say, this is potentially the same, but they say, but according to the state auditor, he said this wasn't the issue. Their issue was they weren't even following statute. They weren't even reconciling their bank account statements. And they were not following best financial practices. Which one's true? I don't know. Could both be true? Possibly. But my bet is this poor mayor is doing his best job out there and just didn't have the skills to run a city. That's my bet.
You mentioned earlier the city of Urda.
Yep.
And all that. My understanding, there's an example also that didn't work, where they incorporated, then within a couple of years, removed the incorporation and went back and incorporated. Do you have any details on that?
The details I have on that are, I wouldn't look to any city in Tooele as an example. Tooele itself is a bankrupt county. Tooele itself is a mess. I have clients, one of them had a huge sod farm. He had a 99-year lease with the county. They kicked him off. They just said, sorry, we need to make more money. We're not making enough, we're going bankrupt. Kicked him off, completely broke the contract. He sued, won a massive judgment against Tooele, didn't collect a dime, they're bankrupt. So the whole county has problems in Tooele. They actually are going through, rather than maintaining roads, Tooele goes through with a grinder and grinds up roads and just leaves gravel, because they can't afford to maintain them. That's a county-wide thing. Urda, I don't think, is going to be able to succeed. I don't think there's any chance of a city succeeding within a county that's failing like that, trying to get off the ground. So yes, there are issues, but I do believe the Urda issues aren't the same as what you're facing here because of Tooele and where it was at. And I don't think you guys have that. I think Weaver's better than Tooele. But Tooele's huge too. They go all the way to the west side of the state. It's a big county. And so again, there's differences there. Any other questions real quick? I can show you. We didn't quite go through all the questions here. We talked a lot of these issues at least. These are some examples in Utah code of powers that cities have. So when you look at what you get with the city, they have powers over a lot of these things.
The library will close in 15 minutes.
Hey, look at that, they're letting us know. Library's closing.
Must be checked out in the next 15 minutes.
It's a long list. And this isn't all of it, this is just this is kind of a provision where it gives you city powers that don't really have a good place to fall in. They've got other places that set forth city powers that are grouped well. These ones aren't grouped well. But these are things that, again, for good or bad, can be regulated. One of the big ones I know, it talks about these rental dwellings, short-term rentals. There is potential there to collect some revenue. And again, the nice thing about being a spot where tourists come to Because if you set it up right, you can make everyone from outside your city pay for your city. And they don't have a vote in how much you tax them. It's kind of a taxation without representation situation. They come here and you tax them, and that's just what it is. And so these are, again, some of the questions you ask on culture is one of the things that I see with it is your valley's been discovered. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on it to develop. I just don't see how you're not in the crosshairs now. And so this is part of my bias, but I look at it and go, your secret's out. So again, what do you do when your secret's out? Will you really keep development out fully, or is it that you're going to be able to restrict it, control it, maybe put in some of these checks and balances, to have more say in it, what goes on? And then, again, Olympics are only 10 years away. It's not that far. I saw that Weber County was super excited because they were a potential site for one of the things, and I think it was at one ski resorts here, Snow Basin. And so I go, the world's coming to your doorstep possibly, if that goes through. But again, solutions, some of the questions to ask, well, this first one is just an example of a check and balance. Can you put something in a charter that says, we approve the general plan, we know it will be this way, but if you want to change it, if you want to suddenly stick in a high rise over here, the voters actually have to approve that. Is there a business that might do well with your way of life here that could help bring in revenue and help maybe even keep it that way? That's a question to ask, to look at. Not all businesses are bad for an area. Some really help an area. Can you have these development exactions where you say, hey, if you're going to come in, we know that roads are going to need to be replaced, so you're going to put a bunch of money into our capital improvement fund that we're maintaining. We're going to keep our taxes low in the foreseeable future because we're judicious and we save today. There's so many ways to look at that, but I would recommend that look at both sides. Again, say, do I want incorporation, do I not? If you want incorporation, what checks and balances do you need? If you don't want incorporation, what checks and balances do you need? How do you get those things in place? And then we don't certainly know what the future brings. We could have an economic downturn. Again, sales tax revenue might tank. It goes back to the slide being unfairness presentation to say, is it likely that you're going to get nothing in sales tax? No. That's just to show if nothing came in, your property taxes would have to go up that much. But again, I look at it and say, well, let's look at it. Let's look at the opportunities. And can we use these things as a way to get something good? So hopefully it helps you guys in making a decision.
I have a question about the snow removal. A friend of mine is very concerned. If we incorporate, how does that work? She says we have to buy our own machines and we have to keep them up for the snow removal. How does that work if we incorporate?
Yeah, so it's the same as with police, fire. You can contract if there's capacity in the county or others that do that snow removal. You can contract for that. If not, if they don't have capacity for it and they say, no, we're not going to share with you, then you would have to get your own. But most cities contract with others for that.
And they can
most small
charge any
cities.
amounts? Would that make it up it, or?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the point of, well, if they have extra capacity, they tend to their people are happier if they're not paying as much taxes for it.
Library will close in 10 minutes.
If they charge you too much for it, you just buy your own. And so they do have a cap of what they can charge because you'll buy your own if it's too expensive. They're not going to be able to charge you more than it would cost you to do it yourself because you would just do it yourself at that point.
So my understanding is we're not just stuck with Weber County snow removal. We can go over to Morgan and contract with them, so it can be played.
Yeah, and again, any city, anything you want, you can contract with for that. You could contract probably with a private contractor, a business that does it cheaper.
I believe it's a state law that if we went to Weber County to say do snow removal, road repair, whatever, they can't charge us an upcharge for that.
Yeah, and so that is,
You know, jack up the price just to make some more money for the county.
and I wouldn't be surprised if that's a state law. I'll just be honest, I don't know.
I think it is, but I'm not a lawyer either.
But that would be one to look at. Can they do an upcharge? But again, I say, but from a market force perspective, just naturally, that upcharge isn't going to happen because there is the competition. They want the funds to help offset taxes. And so it tends to work out. I've never heard of an issue where a place is being charged exorbitant fees for contracting for services.
And we can keep the Eden name. That's, oh, she keeps saying we can't, so, can we?
As in, it might violate some religious freedom something
I
or
have no idea.
discriminatory something?
So she wanted me to ask, can we keep our name?
I would say absolutely. And if they challenge you on Eden as being religiously discriminatory or something, let's have a Supreme Court case on that, okay? That'd be a good one to go for. I'm very comfortable that Eden is acceptable because even in Utah we have some state monuments that have Eden in the name. I don't have any concern from a legal perspective about keeping the name Eden. But if you keep the name Eden, you might get more people here. So thanks everyone for coming again. If you want to get in touch, feel free to. If not, that's great.